I get it. You just want to be happy, and you believe that if your husband would just change something about himself, then you would be happier. But you know what? It just doesn't work that way. Hi, Debbie Cottle, your host for today's episode. Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. Today is all about our our efforts as women to try to fix or lead our husband into some sort of journey of growth. And I've been there, believe me, I've been there. In my previous marriage, I felt like I had to make all the decisions. There are a lot of reasons for why I felt that way. And some of it was true, and some of it probably was just in my head, but it didn't benefit him or me in the end, right? In fact, what ultimately happened is that there was a whole lot of resentment on his part towards me for things that he had just been bottling up over the years. So let's talk about this trap of trying to fix our husbands. I think it starts off well-meaning for us as women. I think that because we have this different perspective on life, I always say women are like butterflies and men are like buffalo. So we have this aerial view, we're flying around, we see so many things and everything's so interconnected for us that you know, we just wanna be helpful to our husband. We just wanna be able to point out to him something that he doesn't see for himself in the same way that we see it. Or we're frustrated by something that he's doing or not doing, and we feel like, if we just point that out to him, then that'll help him know what we want to look different, and he'll just, go ahead and change that. The problem is that it doesn't work that way. Men don't immediately go, "Oh, well, thank you, honey, for, letting me know that, well, the way I'm loading the dishwasher is wrong or the way I'm making the bed is wrong or whatever it is." I don't know any man who responds in that way. If you do, text me, DM me, and tell me. But most men are not like that. What happens instead is that most men feel like if they've heard that enough times that there's this layering effect and they begin to feel like, "Man, I don't feel appreciated for what I do. All I hear about is what I don't do well." And it begins to feel really emasculating for a man. And then, internally, what happens to us as women is when a man doesn't change what he's doing, right away, or even after days, weeks, months, or years of us asking, and I know that gets exhausting. I know that. But when a man doesn't change the way we want them to, what happens to us internally, right? Our anger turns into resentment, and then our resentment over time can harden into bitterness. And I always say that bitterness is like chipping away at concrete. By the time we get to that point, it's a really fixed mindset that we have. So there's this real emotional cost to him and to you waiting on him to change. Okay. What I've learned through life, both from working with people and in my own life, is that my happiness cannot be attached or dependent on my husband being a different person or transforming. The reality is that what I have is what I married. How many times as do we as women do we get married, with this sort of behind the scenes in our brain, like this whole transformation process of what we're gonna walk our husbands through, how we're gonna dress him differently and help him build confidence in a certain area of his life, and we're gonna mold him over, make him over, train him to be this, like, perfect man, and then, 6 months, a year, 5, 10 years into the marriage, like, it didn't happen, it didn't work out that way. It doesn't happen, right? How many times do I say over and over, there's only 2 reasons why people actually really change, right? Inspiration and desperation, okay? So a person is either inspired to change because they've seen somebody or something in their life that has made them go, "I want to be a better version of myself. I wanna be like that." right? So for those of us as Christians, we look at Christ, right? We look at the example that Christ set on this earth and we want to follow in his footsteps. We are inspired to be better versions of ourselves because of that. But the other reason that people change is out of desperation, fear. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my relationship with my kids, whatever it is. So we make the whatever changes are necessary in that short term to not lose what is important and precious to us. The problem with transformation that comes out of that is that when the fear goes away, the fear of losing whatever it is goes away, how long does it take us to revert back to our old habits? So, if we as women threaten, because this happens a lot, right? We threaten to leave. Like, I've tried so hard to tell him what I need differently, and he's not listening to me. So I'm gonna tell him I'm done. I'm done with this relationship. I want a divorce or I want a separation. And we don't really mean it, so it becomes this empty threat, right? But that's what he hears. That's devastating. The first 1 or 2 or 3 times a man hears that, that's gonna emotionally rock him to the core, right? That's devastating stuff. And that might be the catalyst that gets him, making some changes. But you don't leave. So how long does it take him to go back to his old ways and you back to feeling super resentful? In fact, even more so, right? And so the 4th or 5th time that you threaten to leave because it worked the first time or the second time, you do it again, but it doesn't produce the same change in him. And eventually it doesn't produce any change because he knows it's an empty threat. It's done its damage internally. He's deeply hurt by this. Now he's numb to it, or even worse, he's angry and resentful and he's pushing back, but it's not leading to any lasting change. So that threat of leaving, if it's producing a result that you want, it may not last. What I really want you to do is I want you to just stop and ask yourself right now, why are you attaching your happiness to what your husband does or does not do? You need to separate that out. They cannot be, one cannot be dependent on the other because now you are making somebody else responsible for how you feel on any given daily basis. Like they're in charge. Imagine that there's this invisible cord between you and your husband, and he does something you like, and oh, I'm in a good mood. I'm happy. He doesn't do something you like. He's pulled on that invisible cord, and you're off balance, right? Like emotionally off balance. You're upset. Why do you want to give somebody else the control over your own mood, your own happiness, okay? You've got to learn to separate out your joy and your personal growth and development from your spouse's flaws. Yeah, he's got them, and so do you. So do I, right? But your happiness can't be dependent on him changing who he is, or you're gonna be one miserable woman, and maybe you are for that very reason, okay? I actually like the differences between me and my husband now. I learned a lot from my first marriage. I learned what not to do for sure, and I learned about what kind of man I really needed to be married to. And when Jeff and I were dating, I told him from the very beginning, I need a man who pushes back. I need a man who stands up to me, who has a backbone and isn't afraid to tell me no, because that's what's going to make me really, really respect you. And I need a man that I can respect who's going to lead. It's okay if my feelings get hurt. It's okay if I don't always like it. I'm a big girl and I can go away and I can sort through those emotions and I can filter out, the stuff that, you know, is not true. And I can take the nuggets of truth in there and I can change. Okay. And he does the same thing. He hears when I go to him, he hears what I have to say. He pushes back when he needs to push back, but if there's some real things in there that he needs to change, he hears me, but part of that's because of the way that I go to him and talk about this, right? Your happiness is your responsibility, so let's talk about that for just a second. Again, your husband has flaws, you have flaws, but what's your part in this marriage dynamic, okay? What what are you doing to focus on you, all right? Your well-being, your spiritual, your mental, your emotional, your physical well-being, they're your responsibility. I know that we as women are hardwired by God to be caretakers and nurturers, and so we get really good at taking care of everybody else. And we say we don't expect anything back, but we really do. I mean, we're human. Nobody really loves unconditionally perfectly. There are strings attached, even if we are consciously aware of them. There are strings attached to everything that we do. We're always expecting some sort of reciprocity. That's human, right? So if you're not getting something out of this relationship that you want, trying to control your husband, trying to manipulate, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just meaning trying to get him to do something to manipulate him in a way that's going to, lead to you being happier. It's again, it's not going to work. You have to turn that mirror around and go, okay, what's my part? Right. And there's such freedom and power in doing that, in cutting that invisible cord and going, "Jeff's more cluttered than me," right? Like, it's okay. It's okay that he's more cluttered. It's okay that, I know where he's been all around the house because there's a half-empty cup of coffee or water or tea or all of the above all over the house, empty half-empty cups all over the house. It's okay. I can let that go, even though that's not who I am. I can let that go. I do not let that rob me of happiness or joy in any way because that's who he is, and I married him for who he is, not who he could be, right? So let go of the potential and focus on what you actually have, all right? And then I want you to really think about your responsibility for shifting the atmosphere in your home because, women have this huge, that's a huge thing. Like our moods are really big for shift, like the whole mood of the house is often very dependent on our moods, right? So when I detach my happiness from Jeff or from anybody else for that matter, and my joy, my contentment, my peace, my happiness are actually connected to my relationship with God, right? It changes the whole atmosphere in the home, all right? God didn't call me to change Jeff. That's not my purpose in life. That's not my calling. My job is to love and accept my husband the way he is. My purpose rather is to take the gifts and abilities that God has given me to serve Jeff and to serve other people, not to change him. The other part of this also is about boundaries, right? Having healthy boundaries, you know, loving Jeff, but not being absorbed by, the things, that he wants in his life, not being there's a difference between submission and submersion, right? I talk about this in my book because I got submersed in my first husband's dream of, horse ranch and all that. I let myself, he didn't ask me to submerge myself, but I let that happen. And I didn't do enough to take care of myself, right? So when we have healthy boundaries around our own well-being, setting limits, saying no, letting go of unrealistic expectations, doing our own self-reflection, prayer, journaling, therapy if needed. I had plenty of therapy in my life, right? When we do the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves and we stop again attaching that to our husband's happiness, it's amazing how differently we show up in our marriage, how much better it is for us and for them. Try it sometime. It really actually does work. Okay. So you don't have to shrink who you are. You don't have to abandon your own wants or needs. We're not talking about that. We're talking about loving your husband as he is, not trying to control him or change him in any way so that you can find greater peace, happiness, contentment, etc. All right. A scripture that I really want you to think about and focus on with this podcast episode, couple of 'em. There's one in Romans 12 that has to do with being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay. That comes with that comes from your relationship with God. That comes from your daily connection with God, your prayer, your study. When I find myself showing up in my marriage grouchy, in a bad mood, or anxious, fearful, making fear-based decisions, just off track, and I want to be annoyed with Jeff, I want to be irritable. When I really stop and think about it, I know it's because I have spiritually drifted. That's what's actually caused the mood. When I've spiritually drifted away from God, it shows up in my marriage in negative ways, right? That renewing of my mind isn't about Jeff changing, it's about me being connected to God. And the other scripture that I think is really, really powerful here is in Matthew 7, verses 3 to 5. Matthew 7, when it says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but replace brother with husband? Why do you look at the speck in your husband's eye and pay no attention to the one in your own, right? Or the plank in your own, right? Depending on the version that you're reading, that might read a little bit differently. But in other words, you can be really, really outwardly focused on your husband's flaws, all the things that he does that you don't like. But God is saying, again, turn that around and look at yourself because Debbie, you got plenty to work on yourself without worrying about Jeff. Let me handle Jeff. Let me point out to Jeff what he needs to change. You work on you. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. Uh, if you like this, let me know. Subscribe, whatever all the jargon is, you know what you need to do so that you get notified of future podcast episodes. And also, please share this with somebody that you know is really going to value um, this content. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. Um, jump on my website, debbiecottle.com. You're going to see all kinds of free resources there. Go check those out. And I've got 2 courses, okay? Gotta promote my courses. The Path Less Traveled. I wrote a book by the same title, The Path Less Traveled, but the course actually came before the book. The course is for every woman out there who is not happy with her life, and she's ready to stop blaming her husband, her childhood, whatever, and start taking responsibility for herself. And she's at that crossroads, okay? 2 paths. She doesn't wanna continue down the path that she's on right now. She wants a new path, but it's a little scary, maybe a lot scary. I invite you to go check out that course. I actually if you go to the link, I'll put the link if I remember, I'll put the link in this podcast episode, the link or you can reach out to me on my website or ask me about it, but I actually walk you through the course so you can see exactly what it's about. The other course is my Beauty from Ashes course, and that I wrote later because, everything I write comes from my own personal journey, right? So that's for women who've gone through divorce and are struggling. They want to love again, but they're scared, or they're in another relationship already and it's also not going well. And they're recognizing there's these patterns of men that they keep picking, or things that they keep doing, or they're struggling to trust. They're afraid of being hurt again, and on it goes, right? And that's the indication that there's some real healing that needs to happen here. You thought you were over it because you went to therapy, but now, you got these issues popping up. This is also a self-paced course that is gonna walk you through healing your relationships, healing your relationship with God, with yourself, with your ex, if that's possible, with your kids, with the other people in your life, and then preparing you to love again. And if you're in a relationship already, how to know to ask for what you actually need in this relationship, how to set those appropriate boundaries for what you actually really need so that you're not wasting your time. Okay, so I'll put those links to those courses in this episode, or you can reach out to me. I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. Talk to you soon.